Well, okay, gang. By my clock down here, it says it's 2 o'clock, so I'm going to get started. And today I want to get us started looking at the thought of. Oops, I thought I had that muted. Why? There we go. Now it's muted. So, what do you think? Rhetorical question, obviously, since I'm not in the room there to hear your answer. But what do you think is meant by the term critical thinking? That's our subject matter for today. Now, I'm going to start off. Oh, wait a minute. Hang on. I said I'm going to start off. I forgot I added something to a video. So I got to pull up the right files. And watch it not be there. It's not there. Okay, give me 2 minutes, guys, as we're getting started. Let me see if I can figure this out. Just talk amongst yourself for just a second. What I will tell you is if you've pulled up the file for the critical thinking class today, go ahead and close it out because I'm going to try to upload a different file. I made some changes to the slides early this morning, and for some reason apparently I didn't get them loaded up in there correctly, so I've got to go back and reload them. Let me make sure that it's there. No, apparently I didn't save it correctly, so let me see if I have it here. There it is. I want you to replace that file. Close that. Go there. I'm almost there, guys. Guess I should have checked this out before time to start class, huh? Thought I had uploaded the right file. Now, let me see, before I go back to the other computer, let me see if I got the right one in there this time. Yeah, it's there this time. Okay, so. Alright, so if you had the slides open, close them out, go back out to your desktop, and then come back in and open the slides up again. So I need to do the same thing. I'm going to go out to my desktop, and I'm going to come back in, and I'm going to go to Files, and Slideshows, Critical Thinking. I like to hit download and do it in the actual PowerPoint. Okay, and I got the right ones this time. So, critical thinking. Let's start all over again. What is critical thinking? From my perspective, and there are different people you will talk to that will give you different definitions of critical thinking. But in its simplest format, critical thinking is problem solving. And it's not problem solving in the same manner that you would normally think if you're talking about a business class where you have a set problem solving model that you go through. Because one of the biggest things that you have to do in critical thinking is understand, are you looking at the problem the right way? Now in business, I stress that the first thing you have to do is get to the root of the problem. Get all of the symptoms out of the way and get to the root. What's causing the problem? What is the true problem? Because you have to solve the true problem in order to make all the symptoms go away. And that's the same in critical thinking. However, in critical thinking, what we also have to do is evaluate ourselves, and we have to make sure that we're approaching the subject matter from the right direction, from the direction that makes a difference. And that's part of that critical thinking process. So as we get started here, and I will see if I can get these videos. Looks like they're going to work today. So I'm going to play a couple of videos for you. I'll play them both kind of back to back, and then we'll talk about them a little bit. I'm going to start with this one.
Completely empty box, if you'd like to examine it.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I see nothing in this box but a wasted childhood.
Little snarky there, cello lessons. And we have this completely ordinary cylinder, if you'd like to examine it.
Ordinary, yet I sense it is dripping with magical potential.
Oh, dear Lord. A man pops out for a moment to evacuate his bowels and catch up on the adventures of the Cape Crusader, only to emerge and discover his apartment has been transformed into a cabaret.
Shallow Danny's just practicing for his cousin's birthday party.
As I was saying, empty box, empty cylinder, and voila.
I'm telling you, dude, there's a seat on the Hogwarts Express with your name on it.
This is how you're going to entertain your little cousin and his friends? By lying to them?
How is this lying?
Well, magic show is an inherently deceitful proposition. This is an ordinary top hat. You've chosen that card freely. I do not have a set of lockpicks lodged in my keister.
Can't you just enjoy the wonder, Sheldon? Why must you peek behind the curtain or rub the butt?
If we poison the critical thinking faculties of children by telling them that rabbits come out of hats, then we create adults who believe in astrology and homeopathy and that Ryan Reynolds was a better choice for Green Lantern than lovable rogue Nathan Fillion.
Sheldon, he's just gonna do a few magic tricks for some kids. I really don't think they're gonna end up liking the Green Lantern movie.
My name is Zed. You're all here because you're the best of the best. Marines, Air Force, Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, NYPD. And we're looking for one of you. Just one. What will follow is a series of simple tests for motor skills, concentration, stamina. I see we have a question.
Yeah, I'm sorry, maybe you already answered this, but why exactly are we here?
Son?
Second Lieutenant Jake Jensen, West Point, graduate with honors. We're here because you're looking for the best of the best of the best, sir.
What's so funny, Edwards?
Your boy Captain America over here. The best of the best of the best, sir. Yeah, with honors. Yeah, he's just really excited and he has no clue why we're here. That's very funny to me. Y'all ain't laughing though.
Okay, let's get going.
Want to get down on this?
My name is Ed.
Okay, so let's see if I can actually get us back to our slides now. I would say let's talk about, meaning I was going to ask you questions, but kind of difficult at this point. I guess you guys could use the chat feature and reply back, but I'll probably be far enough down the line that even that's not practical. So, guys, I don't have the chat feature up right now. I'll work on getting it up here just in a minute as we're talking. But let's talk about those two videos. The first thing that jumps out from the first one was just fun. Okay, I'm a Big Bang Theory guy. I like the show, so I just show that one as fun. But the second one, there's a couple of things in there where Will Smith applies some critical thinking. And the first one is asking the question, why are we actually here? And they have some fun with the young lieutenant from the Army that, you know, the best of the best of the best, sir, with the salute and with honors. But the reality is the lieutenant had no clue why he was there. And Will Smith was asking a very, very, very valid question. Why are we here? What's the problem that has to be solved? Okay? Now, ultimately, those of you that are Men in Black fans, you know the problem that has to be solved is figuring out how to deal with aliens that are on the planet Earth. But while they're in that little room, there's another problem that presents itself. And that is this written exam they have to do. And they have fun with him ripping the paper and breaking the pencil, and that's not the problem. The problem is they haven't been given anything firm to put their papers on to write, and they're in this egg-shaped thing, so that, you know, it's all difficult. And you see a lot of different physical positions these guys are getting themselves in order to be able to at least attempt to take this, when there's a very obvious solution right in front of them, and that's the table. Now, I always have to put my fingers in my ears when he drags that table across the floor, because it's like fingernails on a chalkboard. Drives me nuts. In my case, I would have just gotten out of the chair and gone over and sat on the floor around the table and done it there. But they exaggerate and make a point of the fact that the table was there, and none of the rest of them were using their problem-solving, critical thinking models that God's designed us all with in order to solve the problem of, how do I take this exam? So I'm going to switch this so you guys don't see me anymore. You get to hear me, but you won't be able to see me. I'm going to switch it so you guys are just seeing. If you're looking on the big screen, you're just seeing the slides. If you're on your laptops, again, you're just seeing the slides. But I'm trying to get the live feed up again so I can get your chats if you send them to me. Okay, I am up and rolling, so if you send me a chat, I'll see it, okay? But I teach my kids that things are right and things are wrong, period. End of story. Wouldn't that teach them to believe everything you've told them without applying any critical thinking? Well, I didn't think about that. As parents, when our children are younger, we have the responsibility to make all of the decisions for them. But as they get a little bit older, and then get a little bit older, and then get to the age that you guys are, you guys like the fact that mom and dad, or at least I would hope anyway, that you like the fact that mom and dad are letting you make some of your own decisions. And you have to be problem solvers, because anytime we make decisions, literally that's what we're doing. We're solving. Now sometimes the problems we're solving are very, 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 very small problems, and there's not a whole lot to it. And sometimes the decision we make entails going through some pretty significant problem solving. But ultimately, that's what we're doing. No, still got to clean these slides up a little bit. So here's the questions I've got for you, okay? Do you react to situations based on emotion or personal bias? When we get emotional about things, we tend not to solve problems well because we go from an emotional perspective. And one of the things that we all have to watch is that we don't approach something from a personal bias. What is our preference? Because our preference may not always be the best preference or the best solution. So we have to watch for that. And then, are you looking for ways to improve communication and the flow of ideas with those around you? That's one of the steps that we take in critical thinking, is improving communication and the free flow of ideas. Because if we have to make a decision, the decision we want to make should be one that we want to make because we have the most information possible to make a well-informed decision. Okay? These are some skills there are some skills that have the capability of greatly improving your capacity to make objective, effective choices and arguments, and those are called critical thinking skills. And we're going to get into those here in a couple of slides. But without these skills, arguments can often be one-sided. How many of you guys have been in one of those one-sided conversations? I end up having those with my wife fairly regular, and I'm on the non-speaking side. So I used to have those with my soldiers quite often, and at that point I was the authority figure, so I was the one speaking and they weren't. But when we're not in the process of fully utilizing critical thinking, then quite often our conversations, our arguments are going to be one-sided. Okay, criticism can feel more like it's a personal attack on one's character rather than an opportunity to open a dialogue and communicate productively. So let's look at some steps or some things that we need to look at when we start looking and thinking critically. Okay, the very first and most important step to developing critical thinking is becoming a critic of our own thoughts and actions. Okay, without self-reflection, we can't grow. You break down your own thoughts by asking yourself why you believe something. Okay? If this is something that you believe to be true, why do you believe it to be true? Where's your support? What's your authority to make that decision? What's your basis of truth? Okay? When you do this, you need to clarify your thoughts, by assuming the information, by assessing the information objectively and find a solid logic to what you believe, rather than it being a muddled idea. Why do I believe this? Can I think of examples in my life when this proved to be true? Or maybe is it something I believed and it proved to be false? Am I attached to the idea emotionally? If so, why? A lot of times, some of the things we believe it because it's an emotional thing. In fact, if you guys remember back a few weeks ago, we had that class on learning styles. And I will tell you that because I'm constantly trying to do the same thing that we're talking about here today, and that's learn, grow, collect information. I've been doing some studies. It helps me with a couple of other classes that I'm teaching. But I've been doing some studies on learning styles, and what I've come to find out is I have to change the approach that I take to teaching that class because some of the newest information that's coming out says that, and one of the things we talked about was that learning styles is really a learning style preference. How do we prefer to learn? Not that we can't learn using the others. So, when we took that little survey and it said we were kinesthetic or we were visual or we were auditory or we like to read and write, that's our preferences. But the bottom line, I believe that all of us can learn from visually looking at things. All of us learn from touching things. All of us learn from reading things. And all of us learn from hearing things. Hopefully you guys are learning from hearing things, because right now that's all you can do is hear me. Obviously you can see the slides, but if I've got this box set up right, all you can do is hear me. Wow. Are you guys getting the live stream? Hang on just a second. Ian, do me a favor, send me a text message. Are you guys getting the live stream? Because for some reason on my computer it's not coming up. It says it's the Langmaid room. Did I pull up the wrong class? I bet I did. I know it was working when we first got started, but then when I had the slides that were messed up. Okay, it is working. My apologies for the hiccup there, guys. I looked up and the live stream wasn't happening even though I had it set up. Yeah. Okay, so Mr. Bacon says you've been getting it. So again, I apologize for the hiccup there. When I looked at my laptop to make sure the live stream was working, it wasn't. And that was because on my laptop I pulled up the class that I teach on Thursday morning. I went to the class for them, the little boxes on your Canvas dashboard. I went to the box for the other class. So when I clicked on the link, obviously it wasn't going to work because I clicked on the wrong link. But so we have to become our own self-critic, but we also have to become active listeners. If we're going to take input from others, we have to become active listeners. Thinking and listening are nearly impossible to do at the same time. Okay? And I will tell you that is true. It's been proven. It's been tested. Okay? If we're actively thinking, and you guys know this. How many of you have been watching a TV show and you get interrupted and you may still be looking at the TV and you're hearing what's happening on the TV, but something happened that caught your attention and you're thinking about it and you missed something? Or you've been watching TV, you're still watching TV, and mom comes into the room and says something to you and you heard her because your ears are hearing everything that's happening in the room. But you're so focused and thinking about what you're watching on the TV that you never heard mom. Okay? they've done a lot of studies about this, and they've proven all of this to be true. Okay, so to become a critical thinker, you need to be able to listen to others' ideas, listen to their arguments, their criticisms, without thinking of your response and reacting while they're speaking. How many of us, when somebody else is speaking and they're saying something we don't like, we're already formulating our response even before they get done speaking, because we're thinking about it as they're going. We need to develop habits where we listen to them and we're evaluating what they're saying without going on and formulating our response. And a good way to do that I learned while I was in the military was listening. And before I formulate a response, one of the first things that I would do is say, okay, so if I understood you correctly, I heard you to say, and then I would repeat it back to them, and I would paraphrase it. But I would give them back, making sure that I understood what it was they were saying. And then I start to formulate my response, okay? You can't properly absorb the information that someone's trying to convey to you if you don't take the time to truly listen. All right, now I could have put a whole bunch of slides in here that talk to you about the way we communicate and the fact that, as I'm communicating, I have an idea in my head, and that idea goes from my head to my mouth. But before it gets to my mouth, it has to be translated from a thought into words. And I have to pick the right words to be able to convey that message to you. So then I speak it, and a sound wave goes out and it hits a microphone that's in the roof in this room. And that microphone picks it up, turns it into a digital signal, transfers it via the internet down to you guys. It goes back through a digital signal to a speaker, and you guys hear that voice through sound waves coming into your ear. Now, that's called an encoding and decoding process. So I have to take a thought and I have to encode it into a language that can be transmitted, that you guys can receive, suck it into your brain, and decode it. And if I've done my job correctly, I've encoded it in a manner using the right words so that you guys can decode it. And even though you're in Colorado and I'm in Kansas City, we're having the same thought at the same time. It's an amazing process that works, but it only works if we're truly listening. Okay? Listening allows us to feel empathy. We hear someone else's story, their struggles, their ideas, successes, their passions. Now, a lot of this stuff is not necessarily, some of it's coming through in the words they're saying. But the reality is, if you guys were seeing me talk, and I use my hands and all these, these gestures that I make while I'm talking, if you were seeing me talking, you'd be getting slightly different feel for this lecture than what you get by looking at the slides and simply hearing my voice. And that's called nonverbal communication. We're going to get into that here in just a little bit too. But when we hear their perspective, we can take that information and then analyze it. Okay? When we use our active listening skills, we can fully understand what someone's trying to tell us, because the conversation continues until the parties can reiterate what the other one is trying to say. Going back to what I was saying a while ago, man, I need to work on these slides a little bit too. You almost can't see that down there. But if you take and repeat somebody's words back to them, it does two things. One, it makes sure you heard them correctly, but two, it lets them know that you are actively listening. Okay, then once we've got the information, what do we got to do with it? Well, we got to analyze that information, right? It's paramount for critical thinking. No one always thinks critically. Trust me, when you were watching those two videos, were you thinking critically? Or were you just simply enjoying them and getting a good laugh out of them like I do? Okay? Sometimes our joy, our anger, sadness, other emotions are too great, and other times we struggle to focus on the central issue at hand. To reach success, we need to analyze the information before us, whether that information is in our mind or being shared by others. Okay, we can break it down by assessing what's being said and ensuring that we clearly understand what needs to happen. Again, it goes back to that problem-solving model. You can hear people talking, and now how many of you have ever watched the Charlie Brown and all you hear is wah 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 wah. The bottom line is, quite often when we listen to people, that's all we're really hearing because we're not focusing on what they're saying. But when we focus on what they're saying and we can truly understand what they're trying to communicate to us, we can analyze that, and then hopefully they've communicated to us in a manner that we know what needs to happen. Okay? When we can take a step back and analyze an argument, it allows us to approach it from an objective point of view. When you take the emotion out of it and you look at something objectively, most of the time, not always, right, Mr. Bacon? Most of the time, we're going to make a good decision. Okay? So nonviolent communication, that goes into a lot of that nonverbal communication that we were talking about. But in nonviolent communication, critical thinking isn't much help if we can't communicate nonviolently, in a nonviolent, productive way. When listening and analyzing different arguments, we first need the ability to recognize valid logic. Then we need to be able to communicate with other people in a productive way. Now, when I was studying communication and all the different forms of communication and the flow and how does it happen and why does it happen and what happens when it breaks down and what are the barriers to communication, and trust me, there's a whole class when you get into college. And you know, after you get done with high school and you've got your associate's degree and you start working on the last 2 years of school, you get in there and you'll take a class called organizational communication. Now, if you take that class with me, trust me, you're going to get so much information on how we communicate, it's going to drive you nuts. Because that's the first third of the class. Because I don't care how an organization communicates, if they don't understand how the communication flow goes, they're never going to communicate effectively. Okay? But as we start looking at that process of repeating back what somebody said, again, like I said, that gives us two major things that's happening there. One, we're confirming that we heard what we thought we heard, and two, we're making sure that they understood we heard them, and we've actually understood their argument or the point they're trying to make. Okay. The bias of nonviolent communication is compassion, observation, and collaboration. When we approach any scenario from compassion, we already have sorry, I can't read today. When we approach any scenario with compassion, we are already in a peaceful mindset rather than a defensive one. You guys get the chance to take a class with Dr. Hessel. It's called conflict management, and he's gonna be all over this subject matter because how we communicate, especially when we make sure that we're communicating nonviolent communication, makes all the difference in the world in conflict resolution. Okay, when we observe, we can observe our arguments and others without judgment and evaluation. We can detach our emotion from the idea. He doesn't like my idea, so he must not like me. How many of you have ever thought that? How many of you think that about mom and dad sometimes? Okay, I know my kids thought that, and now my grandkids are old enough that they're starting to think it. Grandpa gets upset with them and tells them that they've done something wrong or they didn't think that through. They think, well, you just don't like me. No, that's not the case. I do. I like you. I love you. But I'm also trying to teach you how to evaluate a situation. And my grandson is only 6 years old, and I guarantee you he can define what critical thinking is because he and Grandpa have had that conversation a whole bunch of times. because he ends up getting a hand on his butt because he's done something wrong, and he'll look at me and he'll say, I didn't critically think that one through, did I? So just when we're focusing on solving the objective at hand rather than protecting somebody's ego, then we're doing what we've been called on to do, okay? Communicate, but communicate non-violently. Developing foresight, the ability to predict the future impact of our decisions is foresight. Now, I will tell you that I borrowed that wording from a paper that I did, and I have since gone back and done some editing on that paper. I wouldn't call it developing foresight at this point. And I will change this slide now that I realize that it's still here, because I thought I changed it everywhere and I missed this one. Okay. But the ability to predict the future impact of decision is foresight. Technically, yes, but the reality is what we've done is we've looked at a problem. We've identified that there is a problem. Then we've identified what is the root of the problem. We've gathered information on what caused the problem and what possible solutions there might be. So we're beginning to develop courses of action. And then the part that we're talking about right here is when we look at those different courses of action and we say, well, if we do this, then this is going to happen. But if we do that, then this other thing's going to happen. And we start to predict what's going to happen based on the actions that we take. That's developing foresight, or it's learning to use the skill sets that we have at hand to understand how our actions and our decisions have consequences. And that's the newest thing that I'm working with my grandson on is learning that decisions have consequences. So he's got the critical thinking, at least the model for critical thinking, down pretty good. So now we're working on, okay, we got to do this and this and this and this, or we got to do this or this or this or this. So I look at him and I say, okay, which one are we going to do first? And he'll say, well, we're going to do this one first. And the first question that comes out of my mouth is, why? Why are we doing that first? Now, a lot of times he's right. That's what we're doing first. But I need him to understand that we're doing this one first, and the reason we're doing this one first is A, B, C, D. These are the reasons why we're doing it first. Because my next question out of my mouth is usually, okay, if we don't do that one first and we do this one first, what happens? So he'll say, no, we can't do that one first because this one has to be done first so that this one can come next. And then I'm saying, okay, so we're making a choice, and the consequence of that choice is then setting us up to move into our next choice, which then sets us up to move into our next choice. And he's like, yeah, I wouldn't have said it that way, but yeah. So remember that every choice we make in life is really nothing more than we've just solved a problem. Because it was this or this, one thing or another thing. We've made a choice on something. A lot of times it's a choice of, are we going to do this or are we not going to do this? Sometimes it is, we're going to do this, but what order are we going to do this in? Okay? But every choice we make in life is a whole bunch of problem-solving steps put into sequence where we solve this problem, then we solve this problem, and then we solve this problem. So we repeat this over and over and over every day. We are master problem solvers, at least if we're doing things correctly. Every decision should be weighed carefully with consideration. How does the choice affect the bottom line? You can tell I'm a businessman, right? But also for the people who are working towards success alongside us. So how does our choice affect them? Critical thinking requires the ability to reflect on one's own beliefs as well as someone else's ideas and then see the connection between the things. It requires the ability to actively listen to others, to assess the situation, to dissect and appraise the arguments that they're making, and to separate intense emotion from the facts at hand. Man, I got to figure out a different way to do that, because that intense is almost so dark I can't read it. So here's some things that we have to do. Ask basic questions. This is that information gathering step, okay? It's tempting to imagine that good critical thinkers ask, ooh, man, I can tell I borrowed these slides from somebody else because I don't use the word erudite. So I'm going to put this in good English, good proper English, or at least what I would say Texas English. So it's tempting to imagine that critical thinkers ask highfalutin college word type questions when they're trying to solve problems. However, the truth is, it's actually just the opposite. The better you are at critical thinking, the more fundamental and clear your questions become. When you're asking questions of others, or if you're asking questions of yourself, you have to put it in terms that are going to be understood. To enhance your questions with problem solving and thereby improve your critical thinking, make sure you break your questions down. Get it down to the lowest common denominator for the questions you ask, okay? So suppose you encounter a new problem in your work life and you aren't sure what to do. Start by asking the following: what information do I have? Okay, what information about the problem do I already have? Well, obviously I have to have some, or I wouldn't even be aware of the fact that there is a problem. So we have to figure out, what do we have? Okay? And then, how do we know about the above information? How did we get that information to begin with? And what's our goal? Okay, what are we trying to discover, to prove, to disprove, to support, or to criticize? So the questions that we're asking is we've got this problem. What information do I have? How did I find out that information? Ultimately, what's my goal? What problem am I solving? Okay, is it something that's a physical problem? Am I trying to discover some more information? Am I trying to prove something? Am I trying to disprove something? Am I supporting somebody or some argument? Am I being critical of somebody or some argument? It's a problem that we have to solve, okay? And then the class question that's on this page, and this is one that I believe is one of the very most important questions, is what am I overlooking? What am I overlooking? Another question that I try to get folks to ask themselves around here is, when we've made a decision, who else needs to know? Because again, those decisions have consequences, and we need to make sure everybody who's affected is aware of the decision that's been made, so that they can either support what we're doing. A good example of that is we make a decision to have a chapel, our assembly services, instead of having them in the Student Life Center when the play was going on, they moved it over to Liberty Chapel. Well, guess what? Somebody forgot to tell the maintenance guy, so the maintenance guy didn't have the heat turned on in time. So when they first came in for chapel, it was still cold in there. I mean, they got the heat turned on and everything was okay, but they didn't ask themselves who else needs to know. So what I'm saying is, when we're trying to formulate the answers for a problem, one of the questions we need to ask ourselves is, what are we overlooking? Okay, kind of going back to that being self-aware. Okay, people who assume that they're good critical thinkers often turn their analytical abilities outward. Okay, and a lot of times when that happens, they become arrogantly critical of other people. However, being a genuine skilled thinker involves a lot more self-reflection. If we're looking inwardly first before we look out, you will be a much better, much more effective critical thinker. Okay? In particular, if you want to keep your eye on your own mental processes. Again, Am I doing this emotionally or am I doing this objectively? All of those things come into play. You need to know where it started. Where did the issue or the question start from? What did it look like? Where are we going with it? Our brains are incredibly impressive and can sort through information at an amazing rate. But this lightning fast work can encourage us to ignore important factors. How many of you have been having conversations, and as something's coming out your mouth, your brain's already thinking on the next thing you're going to say? I'll tell you, as a professor, that happens to me pretty much every sentence that comes out of my mouth. Because once I've thought about it, encoded it, and it starts coming off my tongue, my brain's already thinking and encoding it and processing the next thought that needs to come out. That's how I can sit here and talk for an hour and still got stuff to say. Okay? Sometimes what we need to do, though, is adjust our perspective. As noted in some of the other slides, okay, being more mindful of our own bias, where are we coming from, how did we get here, is a great help for critical thinking. However, it's only one step in a gradual perspective shift. One useful thing we can do is to read literature on biases and how they operate. Now, I pulled something here. An example is in the field of CV studies, and you guys probably have no clue what a CV is. Mr. Bacon I don't know if he does or not, but a CV is a curriculum vitae. Basically, what a CV is a resume for a teacher. And I was doing some in my graduate work for getting my master's in education. I was doing some research on and looking at different studies on CVs. Okay, but researchers show how identical CVs, they could be worded identical, okay, can receive different evaluations depending on the name that's placed at the top of them. Is it a man's name or is it a woman's name? Is it a foreign name or is it a familiar name? And so on. Depends. A lot of times, if somebody's looking for a specific person to fill a role, a CV will get a different evaluation based on the name. It all depends on the criteria and how they're evaluating them. That's why it's cool when you see somebody come in with the name Tracy. Well, unless you know something about the person or you can read through their CV and be able to discern it, you don't know if Tracy's a guy or a girl. However, if you come in with the name David, I don't know very many girls. In fact, I don't know any girls named David. Now, I have known some girls named Bob or Bobby, but I haven't met any girls named David. Okay. Meanwhile, there are all sorts of interesting work on how the situational factors influence our seemingly stable character traits. For example, different decisions depending on things like, are we hungry? How many of you have gone to the grocery store and had a list of things you needed to pick up in the grocery store, and you walked in, you picked everything up on the list, you went and paid and walked out? I'm 58 years old, and I think I've done that maybe twice in my life. And that's usually when I'm going into the store to pick up one thing. The reality is I go in that store, and as I'm walking through the store, especially if I'm hungry, I come out with half a dozen things extra on the list, or extra that weren't on the list. Like I went to the grocery store yesterday, and literally I went in the grocery store to get orange juice, milk, and eggs. And I came out with orange juice, milk, eggs. I came out with a box of drumsticks, ice cream cones. I came out with a couple of boxes of Cheez-Its. Now, mind you, I made the argument to my wife, well, the Cheez-Its and the ice creams were on sale, so I had to pick them up. And she just looked at me and gave me one of them, them cross-eyed looks over the top of her glasses like, yeah, right. But how, when we're making decisions, are we hungry? Are we in a room, that has a different color? If I was in a room that was white, would I be evaluating things differently? Believe it or not, there are studies out there that physical stuff like the room you're in makes a difference. And you'll find this when you evaluate art. If you look at a painting, a lot of times if you look at a painting that's that's blue or green, it'll have a calming effect. Whereas if you look at one that's purple or red, it's not going to get you upset, but you will be a little more agitated. That's why most of the time when you go into an elementary school, the colors in the rooms are pastels. They're light blues. They're greens. They're yellows. Those are calming colors. All right, real quick, again, I can't see a show of hands, but show of hands, who looked at this and when they read it, they read backward. I read things engineer highway. I'll tell you what, the first time I looked at that picture, that's exactly the way I read it. Part of that's because we grew up in a I did anyway, grew up in a Star Wars age, and I'm sure you guys have seen most of the Star Wars movies and that thing that scrolls on it, and we read from the top down. And but the reality is, if you're driving down the highway, highway engineers think I read backwards. Now, the first time I read it as backwards, I read, think engineers highway. I thought, ooh, wow, I sound like Yoda trying to read. But thinking in reverse is another fascinating and effective technique, especially when you're stuck on a problem, puzzling to get through, and it's a difficult problem. The basic idea is that you flip it around. So if you think it's pretty obvious that A caused B, ask yourself, what if B caused A? Okay? This is kind of that structure that goes with that, you guys all heard it. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? Now, we all know the answer to that because the Bible didn't say God created eggs. God created living creatures. So God created the chicken who laid the eggs to have more chickens. Okay? But it's an interesting argument, what came first. I have a question for you, and somebody needs to give me the answer. If a rooster's standing on top of a barn and the barn runs north and south, so he's standing on the ridge line and he's looking east and he lays an egg, which way is the egg going to roll? And I'm going to pause for a second and let somebody give me an answer. That way I can take a drink too. So if the rooster's standing on the roof and he's facing east and he lays an egg, which way is the egg going to roll? Yeah, somebody. So you guys have heard that one before, huh? Another one that you can look at is a plane's flying from New York to Colorado. Going to fly from New York City to Denver, but it crashes in Des Moines, Iowa. But it crashes such that half of the plane is split in Des Moines, but the other half of the plane is across the river and it's in Illinois. Where are they going to bury the survivors? I'm going to take another drink. Somebody send me another answer. Oh, I'm not getting an answer to that one. See, that's one of those riddle me this type things. They don't bury survivors, you guys. See, you're asking which way was the plane split. But the bottom line is the question was where they bury the survivors. Well, the reality is if they survive, we don't bury them. So think about it. When you look at problems, a lot of times if we think about it and we ask ourselves the question in reverse, especially if it's a problem we're having a hard time figuring out, asking ourselves the problem in reverse will give us a different perspective on what we've been talking about. So I'm going to stop for here, and I'm going to hold for just a second. What questions do you guys have about critical thinking? I started to give you a whole slide full of those riddles so that I made you think critically. And I'm thinking I may do that the next time I teach this class, is to do a whole slide full of riddles. Okay, well, I'm not seeing any questions pop in, so here's what I'll say. Let's go real quick and look at the syllabus and see where we stand. What do I want to do? I want to get out of that. And I might as well put this so you guys can see me now. And I'll go here. I'm pulling the syllabus up real quick and going to the bottom, kind of looking at our class schedule. So today is the 15th. Did I do it again? I did. That's why I had the wrong slides up a while ago. I'm in the wrong section for College Life Seminar here too. That's the reason I couldn't find the updated slides I did, because I was in the wrong one. It's what happens when you teach the same class to two different people. Sometimes you click on the wrong box. Alright, so let's go here. So today's the 15th and we did decision making. Next week is the 22nd and we're going to talk about leadership. But you see, after Thanksgiving, I've got to be determined. So what I would really like for you guys to do is, if you have any subjects that you want me to touch on, please do so. If not, Mr. Bacon, I figure I'm going to send you an email so you and I can discuss what we want to do with those last 3 class sessions for this semester. And I'll get in touch with you guys then. But I also want you guys to look. Your final paper is due on the 13th. If you want to work on that early and get it turned in early, I will go ahead and get it graded and back to you. And then that way, it's just a matter of when time rolls around and they open it up on my end, I can go in and post your all's final grades. One of the things that you will have to do in order to be able to see your final grades, and Ian, I'm not sure, maybe that's one of the things I will do. I'll talk with Aaron and we'll talk about some end of course type things. But you guys will have, not just for this class, but for every class you take. So for Dr. Bittner's class that you did this morning and the other classes that you're taking, you guys are going to have to do what's called our SRI, which is a student review of instruction. And basically what you get to do is you get to grade us. There's 4 or 5 questions that are there, and then at the end there's a couple of boxes where you can put comments in. And what I'll do is on the 6th of December, Ian, what I'll do is I'll look at putting together some end of the semester type. These are things that you have to be able to do, but then the last 2 weeks we'll have to figure out something to do. So you guys hang on just a second. Let's see, I think my main question was whether street smarts could classify as a way of critical thinking. That depends on, I will tell you that yes, okay, from my perspective. Street smarts is simply using the intelligence and the intuition that God has given us to be able to use the educational knowledge we have and make smart decisions. There are some people that I know that are so stinking smart, and I love my mother to death, so none of you tell her that I said this, but that woman's so smart sometimes she's stupid, because she has it all in her head, and she has this intellectual knowledge, but she sometimes doesn't have a lot of common sense, or what you're referring to here is street smarts. Okay, she makes some decisions sometimes without considering the ramifications or the consequences of the decisions that she makes, and I love her dearly. Okay, but I've told her this. Sometimes, lady, you don't make smart decisions because you don't think about how the decisions you're making affect, the second and the third and the fourth thing that follow after it. So yes, street smarts at least is a factor or a component of critical thinking. Okay, so I've got just a couple of minutes after 3. I'm going to go ahead and let you guys go. I've enjoyed this so far, and I will talk with you guys again next Friday. Y'all have a good day.